The foreclosure notice was tucked between our wedding photo and the oven manual. It bore my name, and a second mortgage I never signed. The loan had been approved just weeks before he packed his things and left. My jaw clenched so tight, I felt it in my molars. But inside, everything had gone numb. I stood there, like someone had erased me from the deed with one quiet signature. Do you really know if marital asset dissipation is happening inside your own homes? Her name was Sylvia Brennan, 65 years old, retired nurse, quiet, soft-spoken. For most of her adult life, she believed in small routines and long silences. She lived in a modest home on the outskirts of Doylestown, Pennsylvania, just far enough from the city to grow tomatoes in spring, but close enough to still hear the 5 p.m. train in the distance. The house had been paid off slowly, month by month, through years of night shifts, potlucks, and careful coupons. She and Martin, her husband, had been married for over 30 years. He was once an electrical engineer. When he retired, he still did part-time consulting for a small energy firm. He liked to call himself semi-retired. Sylvia liked to call herself finally resting. But peace has a quiet way of unraveling. In the last year, something shifted. Martin began to stay out later. He came home with the bitter smell of whiskey on his collar. Conversations shrank to nods, then disappeared altogether. When he spoke, it was sharp, practical, and final. He started locking his study, then changed the password on the household computer. The keypad on their safe blinked with a new code she was never told. He began whispering on the phone late at night. Sylvia heard pieces, numbers, terms, timelines. She didn't ask. Maybe she was too polite. Maybe she was afraid of what she might hear. One Sunday afternoon, Martin invited a man to the house. He was in his 40s, wore a pale blue tie, and called himself Martin's legal counsel. Sylvia was confused until Martin, without emotion, said he wanted to begin the divorce process. No accusations, no apologies, just the cold announcement of departure. He would move out within the week. Sylvia didn't cry. Not then. She packed a bag a few days later and left for her sister's home in Allentown. She stayed there for 2 weeks, trying to feel human again, trying to unlearn the silence she had lived in. When she returned, the house felt different, lighter in some places, hollower in others. Martin had taken only his essentials clothes, laptop, a few books. But what he left behind was heavier than anything he carried out. She began cleaning. It was what she always did to make sense of chaos. Dust, stack, wipe, organize. In the study, she opened drawers, sorted paper clips, realigned documents. Then, at the back of a drawer, wedged between old warranty slips and technical blueprints, she found an envelope, thick, unmarked, except for her name handwritten in blue ink, and a red stamp, First Keystone Bank. She opened it. Inside was a copy of a mortgage agreement signed by both of them, but she had never seen it before. The date on the document was exactly 3 months before Martin had announced the divorce. There it was, a second mortgage, approved, released, secured against the house they nearly owned outright. Sylvia clutched the pages. Her mouth went dry. Her vision blurred, but not from tears, more like a sudden drop in blood pressure, like the floor had moved. She felt her breath lock in her throat. A tightness spread across her chest, like a belt pulled too tight. Her ears rang. She lowered herself onto the floor, still holding the envelope. The room didn't move, but she swore the light had dimmed. Her fingers traced the ink where her signature should not have been. And yet, there it was. Neat, familiar, but not hers. She reached for a pen on the desk, the one Martin always used. She began spinning it between her fingers, faster and faster, until her skin stung. She didn't stop until she felt something break and blood dotted the paper. Her first words came not as speech, but as air escaping. So this house, it wasn't a home to him anymore. Just an asset, a transaction, a place to squeeze money from before vanishing. And me, I was never part of the exit plan. In the quiet that followed, Sylvia didn't rage, she didn't scream. She sat with the paper cuts and the red ink. She stared at the framed picture of their wedding that still hung crooked in the hallway. The house groaned with late spring heat. Outside, birds chirped. Inside, nothing moved. This was no longer just the story of a failed marriage. It was something colder, more calculated. Sylvia would later read that what Martin had done was known as marital asset dissipation, that some people emptied accounts, others sold stock, and a few, like Martin, mortgaged the very roof over their partner's head. A quiet betrayal, hidden in folders and filing cabinets. It would be added to the list of true family drama stories women whispered about in community centers, afraid to say them aloud. She always thought grey divorce meant loneliness. But this wasn't about being alone. This was about being erased. A family betrayal story doesn't always begin with an affair or end with a scandal. Sometimes, it hides in paperwork. It breathes through interest rates. It leaves you holding a second mortgage you never asked for, in a house that no longer feels like yours. Sylvia folded the document carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Not to forget, but to remember exactly where the silence had led her. We often believe that if a house is jointly owned, it is untouchable, that nothing can happen without both signatures. But in the marriage laws of many U.S. states, silence can be interpreted as consent. And sometimes, blind trust is the most dangerous signature of all. Martin took advantage of the trust I had placed in him and the fact that I never followed the financial details. He secretly tied debt to our shared home. But I must also admit I made the mistake of thinking the house was a man's domain. I never checked the statements, the loan records, or even requested a credit report with my own name on it. After the initial shock, I called the bank and requested a copy of the mortgage agreement and a detailed history of the loan transactions. The findings were devastating. The mortgage had been approved under joint tenancy, which meant Martin alone could secure the loan. And I was still legally responsible for the debt. I immediately consulted a family law attorney in Pennsylvania to understand my rights under equitable distribution. She explained that Martin's actions could be classified as marital asset dissipation, intentionally reducing the value of marital property prior to divorce, which violates the principle of fairness in property division. Together, we began building a case. We showed that the timing of the loan aligned with the clear breakdown of the marriage. We proved that the borrowed money did not serve any shared interest. And we confirmed that he had deliberately hidden the documents from me. We filed a petition with the family court in Bucks County, requesting several remedies. First, we asked the court to formally recognize the dissipation of marital assets. Second, we requested that the property and the associated debt not be split equally, but assigned solely to Martin. Third, we asked for a temporary freeze on his personal accounts during the proceedings. The court ruled in our favor. They agreed that Martin's actions constituted asset dissipation. I was released from the mortgage obligation, and Martin received no share of the house he had tried to leverage for his own gain. This was not just a legal victory. It was a moment of clarity, because what I went through wasn't a rare event. It belongs to a long line of quiet battles that never make headlines, but define the last chapters of many women's lives. These are the untold family drama stories. What hurt the most wasn't the loan. It was realizing that the man I trusted with my name had gambled away the place where we built our retirement dreams. This was never just about property. It was a family betrayal story written in ink, debt, and silence. After the court ruling, I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and sunlight on the hardwood floors. The house felt quieter, but not in the heavy, grieving way it used to. It was a clean silence now, one I could fill with my own choices. I sold the house, not out of bitterness, out of freedom. I didn't want to keep walls that held more lies than laughter. I used the proceeds to rent a small apartment in New Hope, near a garden co-op where women gather twice a week to plant, share seeds, and talk about their lives unfiltered, uninterrupted. There, I planted cucumbers and daffodils. I didn't know much about either, but it didn't matter. My hands were in the soil again, my back ached, my face burned in the sun, but I was building something with roots, not contracts. Every Wednesday, I visited the Senior Resource Center downtown. They hosted a legal aid group that helped women over 65 review their financial rights. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew how it felt to be blindsided. I brought coffee and stories. Sometimes I just listened. Sometimes I told them what a second mortgage looks like when it arrives in your name. Then, one day, I started writing again. I opened a simple blog called Pages from the Porch. I shared parts of what happened, not with anger, but with clarity. I wrote about home ownership, about silence, about how trust doesn't mean surrender. My story became one of many. In the comments, other women added theirs. Together, it became a thread of family drama stories that had long gone untold. Martin, I heard later, had defaulted on another loan and moved into a rental outside Pittsburgh. But I didn't follow his trail. That was a path I no longer needed to walk. Now, I make my coffee slow. I water the daffodils before sunrise. I keep my bank statements in a folder marked mine. I still get scared when I check my credit report, but I do it anyway. Because healing, like gardening, doesn't happen overnight. It happens root by root. I used to think retirement was the soft ending of a long story, but now I know it can be the beginning of a voice you didn't know you had. So here is my invitation. Go to the drawer. Find the deed. Find the mortgage. Find the documents with your name. Print your credit report. Ask your bank one uncomfortable question. Not next week. Today. And if you feel alone in it, comment below. Tell your story. This space is for women like us, women who were erased and are now writing ourselves back in